Whenever someone says just, I pause and ask, is it really that simple? Is one of the most important aspects of being a software engineer. Actually, not just a software engineer, in life in general. Good engineers build features. Great ones build people. Hey friends, how's it going? Today, I wanted to share an article that I came across that I was really interested to read, and it's titled 10 Lessons I Learned from a Principal Engineer That Made Me a Better Developer. So I was curious about this article because I recently made a video that covered 40 lessons of software engineering that I learned over the past 10 years, and I wanted to see if there was any overlaps. Maybe a principal engineer thinks slightly different than a staff engineer. So without further ado, let's dive into this article. 10 lessons I learned from a principal engineer that made me a better developer. Here are 10 powerful lessons I learned from a principal engineer that transformed the way I think and develop as a developer. The article was written by Ashish Kumar. Now, it seems like it's a recent article, which is great because I've been checking the dates on some of this because one time I read an article that was almost like a year and a half old. This photo is from Unsplash. Unsplash is actually a really cool website. This is probably a side comment, but I learned about Unsplash a long time ago and they just have a lot of royalty-free images. So if you're building any projects that needs kind of just like royalty-free images, this is like a really good place to start. Anyways, let's go back. I still remember the first one-on-one I had with our principal engineer. I had just joined the team, eager to prove myself. I expected a technical grilling, but instead, we talked about design principles, business impact, and something he called engineering maturity. That conversation shifted my mindset completely. I kind of think like design principles and stuff is a little bit of technical grilling as like a first one-on-one, but like usually my first one-on-ones are very intro based, kind of talking about what I did in my past experience and kind of just like talking about what our interests are. Either way, over the next year, I shadowed him on tough projects, joined architecture discussions way above my pay grade, and watched how he operated under pressure. What I learned from him transformed how I code, communicate, and contribute. Here are 10 lessons that made me the biggest impact. Now, this is a really good setup for this article. I'm pretty curious, actually, on these 10 lessons. Lesson number 1. Write code for engineers who replaces you. Your code should tell a story, he said, one that the next person can follow without guessing the plot. That hit me. I stopped writing clever one-liners and started leaving meaningful comments. I wrote clear function names and modular code, not just for myself, but for the poor soul debugging it 6 months later. I don't remember if I actually covered this particular point, but I do agree with this. Like code at a high level is more read than it's written. You should always be optimizing for the reader rather than writing the code just quickly. I actually just made a video on writing good pull requests, so be sure to subscribe to check that out when it drops. Lesson number 2. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. I used to rush deployments, patching things in the same speed. He showed me how that rush often leads to mistakes that cost more time later. Instead, he moved calmly, even in production incidents, double-check assumptions, ask better questions. Funny thing, his approach actually got things done faster with fewer rollbacks. I definitely do agree with this particular lesson. Oftentimes you can tell how senior someone is when stressful situations arise. You could just tell who has the most experience, who's gone through the most like trials and tribulations, because they're the ones who are the most calm and they just systematically figure out a way to solve the issues. It happens all the time. Lesson number 3 is understand business, not just the code. You can build a perfect feature, he said, and still miss the point if you don't know why it matters. He taught me to ask, who are we building this for? What problem does it solve? How does it drive business value? This mindset helped me prioritize better, push back when necessary, and even propose smart solutions. This is a good point. Lesson number 4, read the code base like a history book. Interesting. During a code review, I asked, why is this done this way? He replied, have you checked the Git history? Turns out the odd pattern I was questioning was the result of 3 product pivots and a customer escalation. Lesson: don't assume the code is dumb. Assume there's a story behind it. I wrote a LinkedIn post about this a few weeks ago, and it got really viral in a sense because I think it struck like a chord to a lot of what other engineers feel. There's this kind of like funny meme where you'll look at a line of code and you'll be like, who the hell wrote this code? Why is this code so dumb? And then when you look at the Git history, turns out it's you who wrote that dumb code. And the thing is, there's always a reason why, usually, not always, but there's usually a reason why the engineer at the time wrote it in a certain way. So Have good empathy when you review code and look at like the Git history. And there's always a good reason for these kind of silly, clowny code. Lesson number 5. Never say just. Let's just add a quick API. Can't we just change the schema? He banned the word just in architectural meetings. It oversimplifies problems, hides complexity, and leads to poor planning. Now, whenever someone says just, I pause and ask, is it really that simple? Wow, this is actually a really good lesson. I'm gonna steal this and then like put it into my repertoire. The thing is, I know this intuitively. At a high level, what this is saying is things are a lot more complicated than what people usually just say. I remember there's so many times when PMs or designers just say, hey, can you just add this swiping behavior? Can you just add a button here? Why is it so difficult to just bring this thing and put it over here? The thing is, there's so many things that goes into building software, and things that look a certain way may not be a certain way. Things are just a lot more complicated than it actually appears most of the time. But yeah, I really like this lesson, and I'm gonna definitely keep this in mind moving forward. Lesson number 6, choose the right abstractions, not the most abstractions. He once refactored my beautiful, reusable, generic class into 3 simple, repetitive functions. Premature abstractions is worse than duplication, he said. I learned that good architecture isn't about dry at all costs, it's about readability, maintainability, and fit for purpose. Around the time when you hit senior level, like you're really into abstractions and writing clean code and beautiful code. And I do think there is a moment in time where you realize that abstractions actually a lot of complexity to the code, and most of the time you don't need the abstractions. Like there's a lot of like coding foundational things that would advocate for abstractions, don't repeat yourself, dry, right? But it goes counterintuitive to like other coding principles like make it easy to delete. The way I think about like abstractions specifically is I try to avoid abstractions as long as possible until I actually really need it. That's how I approach it these days, and it has saved me so much time in the long run, especially because code is often like changed all the time, and features, until they're like really mature, they go through a ton of iteration cycles. So oftentimes if you abstract too early, it kind of leads to that particular code getting a lot harder to maintain and change, because there's just more coupling and misdirections that happens in the code base that makes it just harder to reason about. So I definitely agree with this lesson. Lesson number 7, learn to communicate up, down, and across. Watching him present to leadership was a masterclass. No jargon, clear trade-offs, business impact front and center. He also tailored messages, technical depth for engineers, high-level goals for PMs, reassurance for stakeholders. Communication isn't soft skill fluff. It's a core part of being a senior developer. This I definitely do agree. The best engineers that I know, they kind of change the conversation and tone and essentially packaging depending on who they're speaking to. So I agree with this lesson. Lesson number 8, logs are your love letters to the future you. Write logs like you're writing to yourself at 2 a.m., half asleep, trying to debug a crash in production. Since then, I've become obsessed with thoughtful logging. What was the system trying to do? What inputs did it receive? What failed and why? Good logs are like time machines. They save you more than tests sometimes. Honestly, I haven't been doing too much of this. I do use a lot of logs when I'm debugging things. I don't actually make it part of a lot of my systems. Maybe because I write more UI code and client code. The only time I add like debug logs is when I'm building like complicated systems that has a lot of state under the hood. But for certain UI stuff, it's usually not necessary. This definitely seems like one that can be really useful. Lesson number 9, know when to leave things broken temporarily. I don't know about this. Not every bug needs an immediate fix. Not every tech debt item deserves a sprint. He taught me how to triage effectively, understand risk, assess impact, and make strategic decisions. Engineering isn't about perfection, he said, it's about judgment. Okay, I do kind of agree with this. Not every bug is like P0. If there's too many P0s, then nothing is actually P0, right? Lesson number 10. Seniority is measured by how much you amplify others. The most surprising lesson, his impact wasn't just his code. It was in how he made everyone else better. He mentored without ego, gave credit generously, stepped back so others could step up. He told me, you become a better developer, not just when your code improves, but when your team does as well. I totally agree with this. I think mentorship and mentoring is one of the most important aspects of being a software engineer. Actually, not just a software engineer, just like in life in general. I always say when you're learning something or if you think you have mastery of a skill, you should try to teach, because as soon as you start trying to teach, you'll see gaps in your knowledge. So that's like one aspect of why I think it's important to mentor. But in this particular topic, he talked about giving credit generously and step up. I do this all the time, actually. Like when I have mentees and I feel like they're ready for like the next step, I'll purposely kind of step back and not lead the project. I'll probably give them guidance on how to do it, and then I'll kind of just see and monitor how they do on their own. And if they like have that ability like to do it, then it's just like that much amazing for your organ in the long run. Honestly, for me, it's one of the best feelings when I see like a mentee do like extremely well in their career. So I really agree with this point. Final thoughts. I didn't become a principal engineer after working with him, but I started thinking like one. That shift has influenced every project I've touched since. These lessons weren't always comfortable, and some I had to learn the hard way. But each one helped me grow, not just as a developer, but as a teammate, leader, and a thinker. If you're lucky enough to work with someone like that, pay attention. Watch how they move, listen more than you speak, and carry their lessons forward. Because good engineers build features. Great ones build people. Ooh, this is a really good like slogan. I'm gonna steal this. Thanks for reading. If you enjoy this, follow me for more insights on engineering growth, mindset, and leadership and tech. This was a really good article. I'm gonna give it some claps, 10 claps. But yeah, really good article. I think there was some overlaps between my video and this, but honestly, most of them were like kind of its own fresh takes and different, which I thought was really cool. You know, I landed with 40 lessons because that's just kind of the time that I had to write and think about it. But I'm sure I could think of another 100 lessons, but that video would just be way too long. The thing about engineering, honestly, it's not just engineering. It's like working and working with others. There's so many aspects that you can learn to become a better engineer or a better coworker or a better friend or a mentor. At a high level, having a growth mindset is probably what's going to be really helpful, because then that will get you to like read these kind of articles or look out for a good mentor to help you become a better engineer. I think this article reminded me of that. Even me now being a staff engineer, I should continue to think about growing and continue to think about ways that I can evolve and become even a better engineer. Maybe I'll get to senior staff and principal one day. Who knows? Or maybe I'll go into management track. I don't know. I hope you enjoyed this quick article. Now, if you're actually curious about my 40 lessons of 10 years of software engineering, I think people really enjoy that video. So go and check this out if you want to see my take on lessons that you should not miss out as a software engineer right here.